Ever heard of Bitcoin? Yeah, you probably have. At least the buzzwords, right? Cryptocurrency, blockchain, Satoshi Nakamoto.
Kind of whispered in hushed tones, like a mythical creature.
Exactly. And today we're going all the way back to where this legend began, the Bitcoin Whitepaper.
Ah, yes. Dissecting the document that kind of kicked off a whole financial revolution.
A revolution, huh? Okay, I'm biting. But really, why should anyone care about some tech paper from, what was it, 2008? Isn't it all just like complicated code and digital gold
See,
rushes?
that's the thing. It's not really about the tech itself. It's more, well, the Bitcoin white paper is about a problem, right? A problem as old as money itself.
Okay, what problem is that?
Trust. Or how to build a system where you don't need to blindly trust someone to exchange something valuable.
That's a pretty big claim, cracking the code on trust issues.
Let's just say it offered up a pretty radical solution. And that's what we're going to unpack together. The game.
Lead the way. Where does this deep dive begin?
Well, like any good story, it starts by laying out the problem. And it's something you encounter every single day. Every time you swipe your credit card, do a little online banking, you're putting trust in a third party.
The bank, right?
Right. You're trusting them to handle your money, not mess it up, not run off with it.
The good old days before mobile banking, right?
Exactly. Actually, Section 1 of the white paper, that's where it highlights this limitation. Back in 2008, online payments, they were just becoming a thing. But they relied heavily on these intermediaries. And like anything that relies on trust, well, there's risk, fraud, disputes, not to mention all those fees.
Ugh, don't get me started on fees. Okay, so what's the alternative? How do you build a system, a financial system where no one's really in charge, but it's still secure?
That's the million-dollar question, my friend. That's where this whole thing gets revolutionary. It proposes a system based not on trust, but on something way more elegant, more robust. Cryptographic proof.
Come again, cryptographic.
What?
What now?
Think of it like a digital signature, but way more secure, okay?
Yeah.
It describes this idea of a Bitcoin as a chain of these signatures. Each one verifies the transaction before it.
So like a trail of digital breadcrumbs you can't tamper with?
You got it. All out in the open,
Uh-huh.
transparent, verifiable by anyone on the network. But there's a catch. What?
But what's the catch?
The double spend problem.
Double spending. Okay, that sounds bad. What is that?
Imagine you have a digital file, picture, whatever. You can copy paste it a million times. Easy. Now try that with a dollar bill. Doesn't work.
Can't just create money out of thin air, right?
Exactly. With digital stuff. Preventing that double spending, it's a huge challenge.
So with no central bank, how do you make sure a digital coin is only spent once?
That, my friend, is where it gets really interesting. The white paper, it lays out this solution. And it all starts with a timestamp server.
A what server?
Timestamp. You know, it verifies when something happened, like a digital notary almost.
Okay, but how do you make sure those timestamps are accurate? We can't have a million clocks across the internet and hope they're all synced up, right?
You're right. You're right. Relying on one timekeeper defeats the purpose. This is where Bitcoin introduces proof of work.
Proof of dot work. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
No, I'm serious. Imagine this.
Huh.
A global competition. Computers all over, they're racing to solve this crazy complex math problem. The first one to crack it, they get to add the next block of transactions to this thing called the blockchain, along with a timestamp.
So it's like a giant Sudoku puzzle, and the winner gets to write the next chapter of Bitcoin's history.
Exactly. And here's the thing. These math problems, super hard to solve, like needs a ton of computing power. But once you have the solution, easy to check if it's right.
So to cheat, you'd have to redo all those calculations, plus all the new ones. That's impossible.
Pretty much, that's proof of work. It's what makes this whole blockchain thing like tamper-proof.
Okay, so we've got digital signatures for no double spending, timestamps for order, and this proof of work to keep it all secure. My brain's a little fried.
We're just getting started. And these are just the building blocks.
Okay, so how does this actually work in practice?
That's what we'll uncover in part 2 of our deep dive, when we explore how this whole Bitcoin network really operates.
So last time we were talking about proof of work being like this global Sudoku puzzle, and whoever solves it gets to write the next chapter of Bitcoin's history.
It's a pretty wild concept when you think about it, right? A global network with no one in charge, yet it just works.
Right, we've got these building blocks, digital signatures, timestamps, this mind-bending proof of work. But how does it actually function as a network?
Okay, so we've talked about the individual components, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, but imagine it all working together.
Like a well-oiled, decentralized machine.
Precisely.
Right.
Section 5 of the white paper, it gets into the nitty-gritty of how the network actually
So
operates.
it's like, what? Bitcoin under the hood?
Exactly. We're talking about a network of computers all connected, all working together to keep things running smoothly.
And each computer is a, what do you call it, a node?
Node, yeah. Each one running the Bitcoin software, constantly communicating with all the others.
So they're all talking to each other, gossiping about the latest transactions.
In a way, yeah. So let's say you want to send some Bitcoin to, I don't know, your
Oh,
cat.
he does love tuna. Okay, so my cat's Bitcoin wallet, what happens?
That transaction, along with tons of others happening all at the same time, gets broadcast across the entire network.
So all those nodes are listening in?
Yep. And some nodes, special ones called miners, they grab those transactions.
Ah, the Sudoku champions.
You got it. They take those pending transactions, bundle them up into these blocks, and then it's a race. Whoever solves the proof of work first.
They get to add their block to the chain.
Bingo. With the timestamp and
If
everything.
it's happening all the time, nonstop.
24/7, 365. No breaks. And here's the kicker. No one's calling the shots. No central authority.
That's what blows my mind. This whole system just chugging along based on what? Math?
It's beautiful, isn't it? It's like this elegant dance of algorithms. But it does raise a good question.
What's that?
Why would anyone actually do this? I mean, why bother being a miner? Spend all that computing power, electricity? What's the motivation?
Besides being a champion Sudoku solver, of course.
Well, that and the fact that it can be quite profitable. You see, the Bitcoin white paper, it's pretty smart. It addresses this head-on-the-whole incentive thing.
Okay, so spill the beans. How do miners get rewarded?
Two ways, mainly. First, the block reward. Every time a miner solves the puzzle, adds a block to the blockchain.
Cha-ching. They get a prize.
You got it. And that, my friend, is how new Bitcoins are created.
So that's where they come from.
Yeah.
Interesting. But what about those pesky transaction fees we talked about?
Ah, yes, those. That's the second part of the incentive. You see, when you make a transaction, you can choose to add a small fee.
So the more I pay, the faster it goes through.
You're catching on. Miners, they prioritize transactions with higher fees, so it's a way to make sure yours gets included in the next block,
A little bidding war for the miners' attention.
basically. And as more people use Bitcoin, more transactions, those fees, they start to add up.
So it's a self-sustaining system driven by, well, greed, I guess.
Incentive. It's
Yeah.
all about incentive. But let's be real, most people using Bitcoin, they're not miners. Right.
Definitely not. I can barely balance my checkbook.
Exactly. Most people, they just want to use it. Send and receive some Bitcoin without a PhD in computer science.
So how does that work?
That, my friend, is where things get really interesting. We'll dive into the practicalities of using Bitcoin and the fascinating concept of simplified payment verification right after the break.
Okay, so last time we left off, we're about to dive into this simplified payment verification thing.
Right. Because who wants to download the entire Bitcoin blockchain just to buy a cup of coffee?
Exactly. So how does the simplified thing actually work?
Basically, it's a way to verify transactions without needing to process the entire blockchain yourself.
So I don't need to turn my phone into a massive Bitcoin computer.
Exactly. Think of it like checking your bank balance online. You don't need to see every single transaction the bank ever made, right?
Makes sense. But what about the actual transactions? Can I just send a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin? Or does it have to be the whole thing?
Good question. That's where Section 9 of the white paper comes in. It talks about combining and splitting value.
Combining and splitting, like some kind of Bitcoin magic trick?
Sort of.
Yeah.
Imagine you've got a few smaller bills and you need to make a bigger payment. You
What?
combine them. Or you could take a big bill and split it for change. It's the same idea.
So my Bitcoin wallet is doing all this complex math in the background, but all I see is like Bitcoin sent, Bitcoin received?
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it.
Right.
It hides the complexity. But there's another side to this whole transparency thing.
Okay. What's the catch?
Well, if all these transactions are public, on the blockchain forever, what about privacy?
Right. Anyone can trace my Bitcoin activity.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. And the white paper actually addresses it head on, Section 10. Privacy. Now, Bitcoin doesn't offer complete anonymity. Got to be upfront about that.
So it's not totally invisible.
Not exactly. The transactions themselves are public. You can see the amounts, the addresses involved.
So more like a transparent ledger than a secret one.
Right. But here's the key. Those addresses, they're not automatically linked to your real-life identity.
So it's kind of like, the stock market. You see the trades happening, but you don't know who's behind them.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better. It's not perfect, But it's got some privacy built in. But this is all still just theory, right? This white paper, did it actually work?
Well, look around. It's been over 15 years since that white paper was published, and Bitcoin well, it's still here. It's sparked a movement, a whole new way of thinking about money, about finance.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. But honestly, even just diving into this white paper with you, it's given me a whole new perspective. It's not just about like buying and selling Bitcoin to make a quick buck. It's so much bigger than that.
Exactly. And that's the exciting part, the potential.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's the beauty of it, right? The Bitcoin white paper, it opened up a world of possibilities. Not just for Bitcoin itself, but for this whole idea of decentralization.
Hmm.
Blockchain technology, we're just scratching the surface.
So for our listeners out there, what's the one thing you want them to take away from all this?
Simple. The next time you hear about Bitcoin, blockchain, any of it, don't just tune it out. Dig a little deeper, ask some questions. You might be surprised what you discover.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
A huge thank you to our expert for, as always, dropping some serious knowledge. And to everyone listening, keep those minds curious. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.